Okay, so it looks like we are live on Facebook. So I'd like to start by welcoming everyone. This is, of course, a new format for us, so I hope you'll be patient. We did a little test, and I think this format is going to work really well for us. I'm Dabney Sanders, the project manager of the Downtown Greenway. And as I said, we're thrilled to be hosting this public meeting via Zoom and Facebook Live with Thomas Thayer. I want to just mention that this particular project, which we're calling the Westwoods Project, is a special one. It was not originally part of sort of the overall plan for public art along the Greenway. But when we discovered this site, which is owned by Greensboro College, and the college was interested in partnering with us, they've been a wonderful partner of the Downtown Greenway from the very early days. And we just thought it was an amazing opportunity to do a work of art here. Barbara and I had long admired Thomas Thayer's work and were hoping to find an appropriate site for his work along the Downtown Greenway, and this presented itself. And we began to seek out some funding because this was not a part of the original budget. We were able to secure, Barbara Peck did some wonderful grant writing and secured a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. We also were working with the City of Greensboro's Water Resources Department, who has been a strong partner of ours through this whole process. And they were interested in providing some funding for this. And then the Simula Foundation came in to also provide some funding. So that allowed us this opportunity to move forward and begin working with Thomas. So at this point, I'd like to introduce Barbara Peck, who is our public art consultant, and get Barbara to unmute herself and just talk us through some logistics of the meeting and then introduce Thomas.
Okay, welcome everyone. So glad to see so many people signing on to join our meeting. We're going to have Thomas Thayer present his preliminary proposal for us, or it's a refined moving forward proposal with an opportunity for you to use your chat feature both through the Zoom chat function and also Facebook Live. We'll be monitoring both to submit questions or comments that you might have, which we will address at the end of Thomas's presentation. Just note, please, that this session is being recorded and it will be available up on the Downtown Greenway website after it's complete, and then you'll have an opportunity to go back and see it or share the fact that it's up there with friends or other people who you feel might be interested in hearing about this, but were unable to join in the meeting today. I just wanted to quickly mention the location of the site. So I'm going to share my screen quickly so that people who might not be familiar with where it is located will have an opportunity to kind of locate themselves. So I'm just switching over here to screen sharing. And you'll see here, I'm on Smith Street. I was driving down Smith Street actually this morning because I thought this might be helpful. And on your right, you'll see your Welcome to Downtown Greensboro sign, and you're coming up on Meeting Place, our cornerstone, and then up on Prescott Street. And you would make a right on Prescott Street, and on the right-hand side, you'd come down and pass an urban garden called Black Diamond Backyard. At this point, you're running along the railroad tracks, kind of paralleling the railroad tracks on Prescott Street, and then you'll come to Guilford Avenue. You'd make a right on Guilford Avenue, and you see on your left a warehouse building owned by Greensboro College, and here are the railroad tracks crossing Guilford in front of you, which will eventually be the site of the Greenway. On the left, as I mentioned, is the theater production and studio for Greensboro College. And on your right, for those who are familiar, would be the Westerwood Tavern. So you're right in the heart of the Westerwood neighborhood. And the site itself, which is behind this warehouse building, if you were to turn to the left, the tracks run south. You're looking at the site in the distance. It is between Guilford Avenue and Friendly Avenue. And if you look in the very back of that site, you'll see the Friendly Avenue Bridge crossing overhead, with the site, that grassy area to the right, as you move down the tracks. And so that just hopefully will give you a little bit of a way of orienting yourself to the site itself. And with that, I'm going to end my screen sharing, and I'm thrilled to introduce to you Thomas Thayer. Thomas is an American sculptor and painter. He designs and builds public art projects and private commissions all over the world. And he's known for his earth castings, monumental sculptures made in and of the earth. Thomas is a founding principal of the multidisciplinary design firm Clearscapes, alongside architect Stephen Schuster. Their team designs numerous civic, educational, and museum buildings. Thomas is also the recipient of NEA grants, other North Carolina grants, and has an honorary doctorate from North Carolina State University. So we are thrilled to have Thomas here via Zoom and Facebook Live. We're thrilled that he is working with us to collaborate on this installation for the downtown Greenway. And with that, I'd like to ask Thomas to share his screen and walk us through his presentation. So thank you, Thomas.
Sure. So thank you for being here. I don't know how many of you there are. My preference would be to look you in the eyes, but I'm just going to pretend there's legions of people out there who are real interested in art. So I too will share my screen and then make this large. There we go. Everybody can see that?
Great. Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So here, further orientation. I hope, let's see, if I use this tool, laser pointer, here we go. So here's Friendly Avenue, and this is the bridge that Barbara was talking about, Guilford Avenue. Then when we zoom in, you can see the site of once the first bonded warehouse that extended all the way about to here from the 19 teens, which in the 60s burned down, and this black slab is an elevated slab that is still there, and the white is the roof of the Guilford College, Greensboro College scenic design department. So railroad tracks, and we'll look at the site, which is here, lusher than it in fact is. So with the next one, now we're going to switch in the same orientation. Here the railroad track to a drawing, which we can manipulate. Here is the edge of the slab. Here is College Branch, which is a surprisingly beautiful and wild little urban stream with two underground tributaries. Now I'm going to trick you by rotating, because all the drawings are in this rotation and you can just see it better. So we've rotated 90 degrees. My cursor is traveling north on the railroad tracks, soon to be Greenway path. We're going to look at photographs from these three orientations. So the first one is this one, standing on the slab, looking back at the tracks. And there's Friendly Avenue. So we're positing that the site is all of this green area minus these trees, 1.5 of which is already dead. And where the site will go back to something like this tree with the sign on it. The next one is looking up the creek, standing on the slab. And there is the creek. The creek will be cleaned up a bit, mostly meaning the banks will be laid back a little more gently than they are now, and vegetation restored. And with some anticipated other grants through the city water department, there'll be some structures, they're called, that go in the stream that make pools and sound. We're hoping that will happen. And then lastly, a shot from the tracks to the west, basically. And there you see the elevated slab. I should say that Greensboro College has eventual plans to activate this slab, make it an outdoor performing space of some sort, and a gathering and just people space. And so it's my opinion that that is important to the art site, which is here. Interestingly, the creek, which comes along here, goes under the elevated slab and daylights really on the other side of Guilford Avenue. So the threads that make up this concept, which I will reveal to you in a few minutes, there are several threads. One of them is the preconception that this be an earth casting. This is how earth castings work. In this case, in Greensboro, it'll be different, but this is this is a version of earth casting. So I made, with a farmer, a furrowed field here in downtown Kinston, and we cast 7 tobacco barn shapes directly on the furrows. So that's the steel, here comes the concrete into the mold, and eventually we stripped the mold and picked up these 40,000-pound slabs and rotated them vertically. And here you have a piece called Flue, after Flue cured tobacco, which was big in this town. And these are the typical classic Eastern North Carolina tobacco barns profile, full scale. So here you can see the furrows from the actual field that was the mold. This is a larger piece, very heavy piece in Portland, Oregon. Different tools, but both of these were made also by digging in the earth, casting, and then picking them up. A very different shape in Baltimore, Maryland. This is itself a performing arts space in front of a performing arts building. And so what earth casting, one of the things that earth casting does is it reveals the place where they are made and how they were made. For instance, these grooves were the downside in the mold, and those were the teeth of the backhoe which dug these molds. And elsewhere, if you get up close, you can see feet and hands and all the stuff that it took to make these. Every bit of it is in evidence in the earth casting ultimately. Last example is a current piece that is going up as we speak in El Paso, which has everything to do with, part of it has to do with talking about how civilization and nature, this is the very southern tip of the Rocky Mountains, how they coexist and don't coexist. So these aerial photographs which I took became molds in leather hard dirt or mud, which became concrete castings. And miraculously, without me being there, this is half of it, 300-foot wall was erected but 3 days ago. So earth casting is an element in this idea. Another element is some facts about the site. College Branch is normally about this height, but within recent memory, it has twice overflowed its banks and been up to about the bottom of this steel and all around the entire site. So this idea will be able to withstand floods and the kind of deposits that happened happen when that happens. So that's an element in the design. Another one is the fact that in the 60s, when the original bonded warehouse burned down, all the debris of mostly brick, it was a masonry load-bearing walls, thick walls, lots of brick, were simply bulldozed onto the site, and a little bit of dirt was put on top. Since the fire, there have been various operations in the part of the warehouse that was rebuilt, including a ceramic manufacturing outfit. So when I dug 6 or 7 holes with my trusty post hole digger, I hit lots of stuff within about 9 inches. And I found brick, and I found lots of shards of white ceramic dinnerware, lots of it. So that becomes an element when you think about digging in the ground. So the way we typically do earth castings are going to be very difficult given the amount of very hard things below. However, the trusty Big John tree spade, which is a very robust piece of equipment that is used to transplant very large, as large as you can transplant trees. And my friend Chris Wilkerson, operating this particular hole, making this hole, has confidence we can get through all the debris because it's not a slab, it's little units of masonry. So we are suggesting that this is the way to dig on that site. Here is the hole. And on one other occasion, about 8 years ago, I've used a tree spade for an earth casting, and here it is in Colorado, a very different idea. These are vessels that are on their side. There are 20 of them or so, and they are scattered about a greenway, actually, where the Stapleton Airport used to be. What you can see is over time, after you dig holes in the ground, things like rain can happen, things like mud drying out can happen, and the earth casting records and gives evidence of all of that activity. In the case of Westerwood, all the history in the site will be in evidence in these castings. And here's a different one, not made by a tree spade, but it gives you some sense of how telegraphic this process, technique of making is in terms of giving evidence of what's in the ground, color, texture, objects, etc. And the markings of the making. Right here, you can see a very rich set of tooling marks from some tool, I don't remember what. Another thread here has to do with this site and Greensboro in general. Greensboro was a textile place, and because of that, there were large smokestacks around, still are some. And so that idea of a vertical thing coming out of this site, or series of things, seems appropriate next to the first bonded warehouse that brought cotton into the area, which then fed the mills, such as White Oak Cotton Mill, this old photograph. So the site itself has to do very much so with the manufacturing that happened in Greensboro. Another thread is the fact that the history of this site, there's the natural history, but the human history has been warehousing, which is, as you all know, the idea of stacking things within a volume for storage. And so that became a thread, which in turn led me to think about this last kind of thread, which is the stacking of stones historically. I know it's kind of in vogue now and they're everywhere, but for centuries, they were useful. And I have been a big hiker and come upon these cairns which tell you where you are, often at critical times, such as this one in northern Scotland. I was very relieved to find this pile because I then knew where I was. So as you think about traversing the bike path north and south, knowing where you are having a marker to that effect, I think, is a interesting piece of this idea. So I made in my studio, which is right to the right there, right here, and I live on the other side of the alley, a cairn. The single module of which, I guess you can't see me anymore, can you? All right.
We can see you, Thomas.
You can.
Yes.
Okay. Can the public see? Well, here is the proportions of a tree spade hole made into a positive. These actually were cast in a mold I made with fabric to kind of simulate the texture, heavy texture, which we will get. And so that is the basic module and the basic shape that you will now see deployed across this art site. So here is looking down, and on the right is the bike path, and the left or west is College Branch. And you can see a sidewalk that peels off from both north and south and creates this pathway along which you encounter these cairns. So here is a drone shot that shows this spiraling sidewalk to a raised platform that would be an interesting place to hang out and eat lunch, but also potentially a performance space that starts to echo the raised slab, which is right just out of the image where my cursor is. We'll get to the white dots in a moment. So let's just, well, let me say a few other things. So these are the typical tree spade module, starting with a kind of table marker beckoning device along the pathway. And then these two seating arrangements are actually derived from, made in the same hole, or a typical tree spade hole, but divided in such a way that we can separate smaller parts of the module and make seating with a friendly top, probably ground on the top. This is a concept that has evolved and continues to evolve and may continue from this conversation. We already have other ideas on the table that start to raise the question of whether a spiral with a destination to a one place is the best idea, or whether the pathway, the art pathway, becomes a more meandering thing that returns itself to the Greenway in a different place. So my point being that all good ideas have a way of evolving, and they get to be better ideas, which I'm thrilled at the process so far. Now let's just kind of look. This is coming from the south. There is the elevated slab with the warehouse beyond and very chunky but proportioned. This is to scale. And you can see these different stacks of cairns that, now I will say that this, this striation or coloration in bands of each module is a placeholder that says these will have lots of texture and color within them, but they will not be regular, probably not like these are. They'll be much more organic based on what we find. Now, we probably will find a brick layer preceded by a white ceramic layer, and then there'll probably be loamy blackish dirt underneath that. So each one will have some evidence of that sequence, probably. We will do some test digging, I hope sooner than later, so we have a better idea. Here is from the north looking south. And here is from the slab, pretty much. And I want to talk about these dots. So as Barbara indicated, there's a big connection with this site inherently with water, i.e. the creek that's right there. But in terms of funding and just interest, we wanted there to be a connection between the art and the water and the stewardship of that water, which is of great concern to the community and to the city water department. Turns out that there are lots of critters, in very small critters and some bigger critters, but I'm quite interested in the small ones. And on 2 occasions recently, 2 different groups, including UNCG, a biology class, which had an interesting name, students went out and made this discrimination, which you see here, which is called a key, where a fairly untrained person can make the discrimination of shell or not shell, 10 legs or 3 legs, wings or not, and start to evaluate pretty quickly what's in the creek. And what's in the creek has something to do, with the health of the creek. Some of these critters are more tolerant to pollution than others. I'll show you in a minute. So what we're suggesting is to give evidence of these critters in the sidewalk via inlays, such as this project, which is in Western North Carolina, where we inlaid these terrazzo circles, and within them are words, all flush, all a non-trippable event. Here in this Greensboro project, we are interested in using our ability to cut stainless steel very intricately, such as this project. This has to do with water, but very differently. So what we're suggesting is these white dots, sorry to go backwards, are flush stainless steel cutouts of these critters. We know that these upper 3 with the red exist in that stream. And that's a good thing, because these guys are very intolerant of pollution, so implying that the water is not so bad. There are probably sow bugs, which I find visually interesting. I think I've seen aquatic worms myself, and I will always be on the lookout for the rat-tailed maggot, which I think could be, I mean, just the name alone is interesting. So that's what these dots are, and I'm going to conclude my part and share back my screen or not. You tell me. So think of this as a kind of a blurt out of a concept, and I believe there's a way of you all making yourselves known through the chat feature. Is that right, Dabney?
Yes, that's right. So for those of you watching, we welcome you to use the chat feature and ask questions. I'll direct those to Thomas, and then he'll answer. So thank you. We have one here from Michael Clapp, who asks if you had considered incorporating the idea of multiple water lines due to flood and overflow conditions to generate a stepped landscape siting rather than a purely flat substrate, a way of tying more deeply to the history of the site. This could provide more active participation as informal performance or occupation by Greensboro Greenway visitors.
Wow, interesting question and observation. I'd like to know more. I'm not sure I understand all of the question. It is flat now and has been flat that I know of for a long time. So I'm curious about the stepping idea from a historical point of view.
Great. So Mike, and the question, Thomas, just for your information, came from a local architect here who has been a great friend and supporter of the Greenway. So I'll let Michael maybe elaborate on that question as you answer the next one, which Derek Harmon, who is with the City of Greensboro's Parks and Recreation Department and is the supervisor for the maintenance of the downtown Greenway, is asking about the plans for lighting.
Great question. Yeah, and so these white dots are not in-ground lighting. Let me quickly point that out. There is power nearby, and I've talked to the city lighting person, or at least one of them, who is says that getting power to the art site is very possible. My thought is that the lighting needs to be above the flood line, and we have done this a few times where we put conduit, code compliant conduit in the castings and cast the ability to receive lighting. So I'm thinking if you can see my cursor still, in sort of randomly spiraling around these cairns, there could be light that shines down or up and creates self-illumination, but low voltage and well above where water is just going to do any kind of lighting in. So I think that's a really credible way of having reliable lighting.
Great, thank you, Thomas. So Lynn Wooten says, I love this, very exciting.
Thank you, Lynn.
Michael has also responded back to your sort of further question to him. He says water lines can be an abstract method of introducing relief to a historically flat site. The idea of stepping might contribute to the theatrical nature of Greensboro College's adjacent programming. Love the concept so far, Thomas.
Thank you, Michael. Great idea. As you can imagine, Michael, budget will rear its ugly head at some point.
So we invite the other participants to continue to post any questions and or comments you may have via the chat function. For the folks on Facebook Live, we hope you will do the same.
Dabney and Barbara, do you have any questions or comments that have come up in you that we could, while we're waiting?
Dabney, you want to take Joan's question?
Oh, okay.
Oh, sure. I've got one more question. Yes. Will there be landscaping plan? Joan Stone is asking that.
Great question. And that, because what's shown here looks like some sort of pristine putting green, which it is not now, nor will it be, for reasons of flooding, maintenance, and durability. So what the ground plane is, I think, is a collaborative decision that needs to be made with the city, who will be maintaining this, and the owners of the land, Greensboro College. I think it needs to be durable. I think it needs to be friendly. So if you're not on the path, you're okay. I think it needs to provide and encourage an invitation to go to the bank of the creek, which isn't in the same plane as is implied in this rendering. There's a pretty steep and bank that must be 6 feet down to at least to the water.
Great.
So to be determined, but a great question.
So we have a few more questions that have come in. David Schramm is asking, are the stacks climbable and are they sturdy?
They're very sturdy. They'll withstand climbing and they'll withstand flooding. We have had some discussions about how to reduce or not be too friendly. Truth be told, I don't think it's a particularly friendly thing to climb. It's rough. It's a bit of a stretch to get from one horizontal plane to the next. That's not to say people can't. I have a good friend who's a climber who's told me I could get up this, but she's a nearly professional climber.
Great.
Again, a good question and observation.
So another question and a comment, Steve Danford comments, the site is visible from Friendly Avenue. How important is that as a design feature?
It's not very visible now. In the winter, it's more visible. So across the creek, let's see if you can see my So Friendly Avenue would be right here. And so there's a distance between the creek and the bank that Friendly Avenue forms that is heavily wooded and overgrown. And as it's my understanding that in the scope of the Greenway and Art project, that is not part of the scope, as in cleaning out that. That's my understanding. I could be wrong. But my point being, there's a lot to see through, especially in the summer when the leaves are out, from Friendly Avenue.
Great. So we've got two comments that are similar. One from Pixel 3XL and one from Brian Crean, who is a big Greenway volunteer and supporter. Both are saying they really like the concept. One welcomes the idea that the path would return to the Greenway.
Mm-hmm.
And Brian Crean mentions that as a runner, he likes the idea of connecting the path further along as well, as opposed to the circular. So we've got
I've heard that before.
yes. So we've got John Sari, who is with Greensboro College in the theater department, says, I like the concept, want to be sure to watch the water flow towards the structure.
I'm not understanding, John, what you mean by that. Water has sheeted across virtually, to my understanding, this whole site, and we're anticipating building something that can withstand that.
Great. So maybe, John, if you want to add an additional comment to help clarify that concern, we'll get back to that. Cal Bond, who is a biology professor at Greensboro College, has raised a couple of questions about some of the things that have been found in the stream. He mentions that the rat-tailed midge uses its tail as a snorkel for breathing, which
Wow.
is a sign of tolerance of the silty water. So that's just another little tidbit you might be interested in.
So there is one. Oh, so it's midget, not maggot.
He says the rat-tail midge.
Midge. Okay.
Midge. Yes. So here we've got a comment from Mebin Ham asking to expand a little bit on the changes to the creek. And Thomas, do you want me to answer that question?
That'd be great.
So
You probably know more about it.
we have been working very closely with the City of Greensboro's Water Resources Department, as well as the Piedmont Conservation Council, and have applied for a Clean Water Management Trust Fund grant. We made that application in February. We've done site visits with the rep. We've had a very favorable site visits, encouraging comments about the project. Those projects all get debated and voted on for funding in September. So we should know this fall if we receive that additional funding for the Clean Water Management Trust Fund grant. In the meantime, we've built into just the basic construction project some minor level of stream restoration. And what the Clean Water Management Trust Fund grant will do was just allow us to expand that to an even greater extent, looking at stabilizing the banks. In some cases, the stream has been diverted into unnatural patterns, and we'll be looking at allowing the stream to run a more natural sort of course. As Thomas mentioned, there also is an opportunity to add some additional large rocks in the stream, which allow for greater water flow, which increases the health of the stream and also provides some additional sound as well, which is nice from an aesthetic standpoint. So we've got lots of questions coming in. I'm going to keep heading on.
Daphne, can I interrupt? There is one under the Q&A, and I think people might be interested in this. It's from Joe Wiebe, who is one of our key Greenway volunteers, and he says, what is the production timeline? So maybe Thomas could speak to that and you.
Perfect. Thank you.
Mhm.
I think, Dabney, maybe you should answer that because it has to do with the Greenway construction, which you know more about. But I mean, from my point of view, I'd love to build this sooner than later, but the time has to be right for the city.
Well, and I think we're envisioning that this fall would be a great time. I know Thomas has mentioned the fall is a great time for him to actually do the digging. So we'd like to have that happen this fall, and then we would imagine an installation happening to be completed by I think it's June of 2021 is sort of our outside timeline on that. So a few more comments. Roger Bardsley has mentioned, Thomas, to you that he presented an award to you in Lenore for your sculpture Across the Grain that he loved, and so was excited to be able to join the call and see you here today.
Thank you. Nice to see you again, sort of.
So Jane Levy has asked, is this considered a safe area, and will the sculpture be graffiti proof?
I'm not sure what you mean by safe area. The graffiti issue, to be honest, these surfaces are not the friend of spray cans. They're dusty and not smooth, and it is really hard to get a decent tag on these surfaces. I have not had that problem because there are better walls to put graffiti on than these.
Great. And sort of related to that, Thomas, David Schramm has commented that unfortunately the Greensboro College building gets tagged often with paint. So he's asking just about that same question. I will just mention that in other projects we've done, we have had anti-graffiti coating applied, and I don't know whether that would be possible or appropriate here, but we certainly could do some have Thomas do some investigation into that.
Yep.
John Sorry has come back and just said he wants to verify that the stream is allowed to enter the structure at the current location and not change the velocity of the water. So I would say we don't have any intentions of changing how the stream enters the structure, either with the work that the Greenway construction is doing or Thomas's work. Robbie Hassel, who is a member of our oversight committee, has been a long-time Greenway volunteer and advocate, mentions that he recently read with great interest of your preponderance project at Campbell Law School in Raleigh. It appears that each of the metallic structures are of slightly different heights, and I see that the renderings here may show differing heights for the cairns. As you've indicated that the spiral design is itself flexible, would that affect the number and level of the cairns?
It could, as the ground plane changes, if it does. Yeah, it could. It would probably most certainly affect the placement in plan. But
great, and Robbie
the intention
also
is
says
that the basic mass and height, which is 21 feet of the tallest, and the basic elements would be the same, but they could be rearranged. Yes.
Great. And Robbie concludes by just saying he's fascinated by the potential and by your vision.
Thank you.
I'm just scrolling back to see if I missed anything. So Cal Bond wanted a reminder, is this a view looking south? And so Thomas, I think this view is actually looking sort of southwest, right?
Correct. So the Greenway is on your left here, and this cursor is going in the southerly direction. We are in a drone at this point. We're 50 feet up or 30 feet up, so we're not standing anywhere.
Great.
And Dabney, I wondered if I think that there's a gap here in any questions, but I just wanted to add a couple of things. One is that if anybody who's listening in is particularly interested in joining in some way in this project, we are looking to have some engagement opportunities both with site and stream cleanup and also with Thomas during the installation itself. So be sure to kind of keep yourself informed and through Greenway notices and newsletters to avail yourselves of those opportunities, because we will be looking for volunteers for those. The other thing that I wanted to add was also that there will be signage on the site, and the signage will kind of point to the stream and the thought behind this project, and will give more information about the role that water resources plays in our in maintaining our public waterways, and also kind of how this work relates to the health of the stream and improving that as we go forward. So I just wanted to make sure that we included a couple of those things. And also, you know, if anybody out there is looking to fund a really great project, we would love to have a bridge over that stream. So would love to find some ways of maybe making that a reality too, because it would be really nice to connect that site across the stream to the other side. So I wanted to add those few comments to our conversation.
Yes, thank you, Barbara. And for anyone who is interested in being a part of helping with the site and stream cleanup, you can contact Laura Lorenz in our office at lorenz@actiongreensboro.org. We have another question from Cal Bond, just confirming that the smaller cones will be designed as benches.
Correct.
If you could just, yes.
So these, oops, what happened?
Uh-oh, we might have lost your.
No, okay,
your
I think
share.
I just advanced
There we
my
go.
mistake. All right, so these are seating clusters, and this you could certainly sit on. It's a little taller. It's more sort of table height.
Great. Brian Crean suggests that perhaps creative lighting could help discourage graffiti vandalism, but he appreciates the overall vision very much. John Sari has also commented that they've had people who randomly visit the site over the years creating smaller cairns in this area. So that's interesting that history is already there.
Not surprised.
Yeah. So we have time, it's about 1:15. We have time for a few more comments or questions if anybody would like to share. I think we've got one more on the Q&A. Hannah Cockburn, who is the head of our local Department of Transportation, has said thank you for the session. She thought it was very successful. It was a virtual meeting. Interested in team building opportunities for GDOT. So that's great.
Great, great. Okay.
Okay. Any other final questions or comments here?
Well, I'd love to say this is my first virtual public meeting, and I know I'm missing a lot, but it's been, thank you all for attending, and it's been kind of fun in a weird sort of way. So thank you all for participating.
That's great. Thank you, Thomas. And we've had about 38 people on this Zoom call. I'm not sure how many on the Facebook Live. Maybe Candace, if you've got that number, you could shoot it on the chat, and I'll let Thomas know that. I will say that we have, as Barbara mentioned early on, this has been recorded, and we plan to do a little just editing of the initial setup of the meeting out, and then post that on the Action Greensboro or on the Downtown Greenway website. We'll send out an e-blast about that as well, and we'll be posting Thomas's presentation. So we encourage folks if you've watched this and know others that were interested and couldn't be a part of it, they'll certainly have an opportunity to view it and send comments back to us that we can share with Thomas. We also had about 15 viewers on the Facebook Live event. So
Great.
great. Okay, well, with that, I think we will thank everyone for participating. Margaret Benjamin has just popped a comment. Thank you for this very exciting project for Greensboro. Thank you for that, Margaret. Great, so thank you for everybody participating, and Thomas, thank you so much for this wonderful vision and presentation, and we're looking forward to continuing the process of working with you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Yep. Thank you, Thomas. This is great. Really appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye-bye.